Bien, good morning. Bonjour à tout le monde.
Good morning, everybody.
Nous allons commencer parce
We're going to
que
begin now.
on est quelques-uns dans la salle.
There are a few people
Mais
already
nous sommes
in the
beaucoup plus de
room,
l'autre côté de la caméra.
but there are a great many
Donc, il faut
people
commencer à
listening
l'heure pour
behind the scenes, so we
respecter
have
tous
to
les horaires.
be punctual
Juste
in
un
order
point qu'on me
to respect the
demande, point
timetable. Now,
technique,
I would ask from a
tout le monde
technical
a
perspective that everybody take
son petit engin de traduction,
a
son casque.
headset.
Ok, bon, voilà. Il y en a ici, si
There are some
ça, c'est
here,
pour
should
les
you need
intervenants,
any.
etc.
These are for the
Mais
speakers, but there are some in the room.
on va commencer par débuter cette session
So
par
we're
une
going to
intervention
begin this
de
session
Dorit, notre présidente
with
du comité
a word
Histoire
from the
naturelle,
chairwoman from
qui va faire un
ICOM-Nathist,
petit
and she's going to talk to us about
mot
what.
d'accueil
She's going to give us
pour
a
débuter
warm
la
welcome in
conférence.
order to initiate today's proceedings.
Bonjour. Je n'ai pas français.
Hello, everybody.
Mon français, c'est
I'm
terrible.
afraid my French is not very good.
So I will speak English. I'm very excited to be here in Nantes, having our annual meeting of Nathist, the International Committee for Collections and Museum of Natural History. And it is an honor to be hosted in Nantes. It is a city that I think this is my first time coming here, and I'm enjoying it very, very much. Our theme this year is museums, collections, and the socio-ecological challenges, which actually means that museums are experiencing a changing world now, and we need to rethink our purpose and our job in our communities. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the new museum definition, but if you will have a look at the new museum definition, you will know that the museums is not only for preserving the collections, they have to be more active in their communities, more active in the society. We have important job to deal with issues that are for all of us, like climate change. We are the museums that people would come to know about climate change and all other 17 SDGs that we can deal with in our museums. And so this meeting is very important, and we are looking to hear and from you, our members, about your experience and knowledge about these issues. I'm very proud to say that we have about 50 people on site and about 150 people online. So when I'm speaking to you, as we heard yesterday, actually we are speaking to 200 persons, and I like it very much. Annual meetings, usually it's an opportunity to meet other people from other museums, to hear their experience and go home with new ideas to do things in our own museums. I want to thank the people of Natural History Museum of Nantes and the director, Philippe, who is also my vice. He's the vice president of ICOM-Nathist, and our host from the city of Nantes, and especially my members in the board. The board is very active, and they worked very, very hard to make it come through, especially Fedra, our secretary, who is working very, very, very hard. So thank you very much for coming, and I wish all of us a very successful conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dorit. Next, Aziliz Gouez est conseillère municipale
is a
déléguée
local
à la culture
councillor
scientifique, technique et
working
industrielle.
in scientific,
C'est
cultural
une
and
politique
industrial
importante
culture, which is
de ce
particularly
mandat.
important
C'est
here.
vraiment très important pour nous dans le
It's an
développement
important role for us
du
to see
milieu,
filled
de manière générale, de
within
la culture scientifique. Elle est
the
aussi
cultural
conseillère
milieu.
métropolitaine,
She's also a metropolitan
vice-présidente,
elected official, vice president,
Et je vais lui laisser la parole.
and I'm going to hand
Et
over
elle
to
va
her
pouvoir
immediately.
s'exprimer,
And
sachant que
she'll
elle a
talk
beaucoup
to
de
us.
choses à nous dire.
Bearing in mind, she has a great many things to say, but I'm going to try and be brief, of course. Good morning, everybody.
C'est un honneur pour la ville de Nantes
It's a real privilege for the city of Nantes to welcome you here, this conference for ICOM-Nathist.
Et c'est pour moi un grand plaisir
For me personally, it's a pleasure to welcome you and to be part of your work this morning.
The working language of your network is English, so I shall proceed in English. So it is an honor for the city of Nantes to host this annual conference of the ICOM-Nathist network, and it is my very great pleasure to be welcoming you here this morning. The great challenges of our times are at the heart, or will be at the heart, of your discussions today. And as Dorit, your chairwoman, has just said, we are living through times of great upheavals in all fields of life, social, economic, cultural, but also democratic, and of course, ecological. And indeed, the magnitude of the contemporary ecological crisis is one that challenges, that questions not just the boundaries of social life, the relations between humans and non-humans, our models of growth, but also the boundaries of, I should say, universal knowledge, or what was built as universal knowledge and has been held as such since the great revolution of modernity. So those of you who are English speaking will think of Francis Bacon, so nature, culture. We in France would rather go back to René Descartes with this great distinction between object and subjects. So all of those categories are nowadays challenged, and I think that the environmental crisis is a big factor in that. And museums, of course, hold a specific responsibility in contributing to those public discussions, not just because they are emblematic institutions of knowledge, but also because they are institutions that are, you've just said it, embedded in society. So it is therefore absolutely relevant, in my view, for your network to have chosen to reflect on the role of collections, of museum collections, in mediating contemporary challenges. And it is also very appropriate that you should do so here in Nantes. Nantes is a city which has chosen to tackle head-on the environmental crisis, and maybe Philippe has told you about it, but there is a new project underway for this museum which is really centered on those issues of climate change, the collapse of biodiversity, and the conditions for us to continue tomorrow to dwell on this planet. And this museum will, I hope you will come back in 2028. Is that it, Philippe? Yeah, around those dates, hopefully, to discover a new museography that will present human life as having evolved not just alongside, but also in relation to many other forms of life. But Nantes is also a city which has a a specific history of contribution, if I may put it that way, to well, the European imperial enterprise. This was one of the major French ports dealing in self-slave trade, and it is also a city which has been holding a discussion, a critical discussion, a reflection, a difficult reflection on that history of slave trade. And those of you who will choose on Friday to visit the Museum of History, le Château des Ducs, so the Museum of History is in the castle, will discover that history and the way in which we've chosen to grapple with it. And those of you who will choose to visit the museum next door, le Musée d'Aubray, will also discover a museum that was built upon collections granted, donated by 18th, 19th, as well as, I believe, 20th century collectors and philanthropists who, well, most of them being from well, merchants' families who did take an active part in that slave trade, in that slave of human beings. And so, of course, that history obliges us, and you will find in the way that the collections next door are on display that this critical reflection on culture, democracy, diversity is at the heart of our museum project here in Nantes. Of course, you know, you are members of natural history museum, so you may find that those issues are not so central to your own concerns. Yet I believe they are. The way you put collections on display says a lot about the ways in which you engaged with those issues. And dear Philip, as an anthropologist, I will take the liberty anyway of asking if a meteorite is a cultural object. You are a geologist, and your answer may be that it is not. I am also part of another network called Cultural Rights and Cultural Democracy, and one of our contributors in that network, Argentinian researcher called Americo Castillo, has just presented a paper showing how a meteorite, at least for the Muscovy First Nation of Argentina, can be held as a cultural object, one with great spiritual significance. And we know, more than most, that those issues of trading objects, even inanimated objects such as stones and meteorites, can be very complex matters. So I think that one of the questions that museums are facing nowadays is how you tackle those complex questions, how you put those objects on display, and how you engage in doing so with local communities, which in our cities are very diverse and of various origins. And so that is, I think, one of the questions that Dorit mentioned, and it's a very important one. I would think that in reflecting upon the various regimes of knowledge, if I may put it that way, that is science, and then other regimes of knowledge which were deemed irrelevant in modern time. The question is, what place do you give to those other cosmovisions? I tend to think that it's interesting to explore the links between ecosystems and cosmovisions, but there are no straightforward answers to those complex questions. There are ones that deserve to be discussed, and I hope that this conference will be a good opportunity to do so, and that indeed you will go home with new ideas, new perspectives, and I am sure that you will, because I think that one of the wealth of this network is the fact that it federates museums from so many different countries, from what we used to call the North as well as of the South. So I have no doubt that your discussions during those few days will be very fruitful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aziliz. Juste un point qui me paraît important de dire, c'est un point de terminologie.
When we talk about terminology,
museum
with an accent in French is the Natural History Museum. When we call about museum, of course, when you talk about museum in English, it encompasses all different kinds of museums. And I know it's important for the translation. Sometimes it cannot be particularly, sometimes for translation it's particularly difficult. But when you have museum with an accent, it's just all of the museums of natural history. The museum is the Natural History Museum, whereas of course in English it encompasses more. So I hope you're following this. So now Nicolas Cardou, he is in charge of culture in this city, and he's going to talk to us about the way in which we deal with all these questions and why these questions have actually been on the table for quite some time. And I think Nantes, if I will, has been a pioneer in the asking of these questions. Hello, everybody.
Nicolas Cardou,
I am Deputy Director for Art and Culture here in Nantes. I'm going to speak French. I think it's more comfortable for me to speak my native language. Also, in order, when I talk about our trajectory, what we want to do, the relationship we have with heritage, which is quite specific in Nantes, and which will help deepen the discussion, which was introduced by Alice, our relationship with the heritage. We are working hand in hand with several museums on several subjects. Nantes, as a city, has a very complex heritage in many ways. Obviously, there is a certain amount of responsibility to universal memory. Examining its place in triangular trade, its role in France, the number of expeditions that left from Nantes. This, of course, remember, is a city from Nantes. More than two-thirds of the expeditions left from the port of Nantes. So this history has been a bit of a ghost over some decades of the 20th century. And at the end of the 1980s, with a new political majority in place, we had to ask ourselves a few more questions about our cultural heritage and our history and our vision of history. So this goes through museums, and of course museums then had to answer the call and change to respond to this. So this is a reflective period which lasted several decades and gave birth to some wonderful debate. We talked about slavery in a more direct fashion, far more than we did before anyway, far more direct. We talked about an unfortunate history. That was the adjective that was used prior to this. And they said they weren't very proud of it, but that was an end to the story. Well, quite naturally, with even more knowledge, which has been gleaned over the 1980s and 1990s, researchers began to come out with more figures, and the city of Nantes, in response, wanted to talk about the question. They wanted to deal with this in a head-on fashion through a knowledge-finding movement, and also making sure that this story, this history, was visible in the public space. And we can see that in front of us in the Quai de la Fosse. There is a memorial to those who suffered during slavery, and I encourage you all to go and see this, quite naturally. And in this public space, we recognize a fault in history. And here you will see the long history of slavery and stories from people who suffered and people who have lived through this are outlined. People that once were slaves who were emancipated. You're going to see their testimony. And these are people who have called for a public place to honor the memory of people who suffered through slavery. But hitherto, we saw very few public monuments to this. It was very much a subject that was not visible. And we had to talk about the place of men in this city, which was heavily involved in triangular commerce in the slave trade. So the history of Nantes is obviously to be found in the Natural History Museum, and there you will really see the outlines and go into depth on the history of the city. We also want to set our city in a European space, so we had to know who we were in order to know where we were going. And I think that this question was asked slowly in every museum in the city. We had to know where we were going, but that also entailed thinking about the vision that we might have of history, and also the relationship that we had with the world. They were very intense, they were complex. And so we were called to reconsider world history, a history which is connected. We work with other people, so it's a universal history. And I think this is slightly worrying history. Why? Well, as Patrick Boucheron said, it obliges us to exhibit with happiness, to exhibit our destiny and our inheritance. In the same vein, we were able to see that there was a journey throughout history for this city. And we can see that Nantes was one of the first cities which actually transferred this idea of the cultural history days, which is very patriarchal, into almost a matriarchal history. And so we were asking, what's the role and what is the place of workers in the city? What is the place of knowledge in the city? We have to recognize this very pluralistic history with the encounter of several people, several worlds in one city. What was the role of all these people from different origins in this city? Where was the public space? How could we meet? How could we be together in this city? And we had to re-examine history in order to make it our own. And of course, with the metropolitan effect, the museums were transferred into the metropolis, into the city in 2016. And this transfer then allowed us to have a larger remit and to have new means in place. And with this transfer of new perspectives, and I think also a certain need, with that came a certain need to reset museums. The art museum, the art gallery tried to think about how they hang pictures in order to try and deconstruct the image we have of classical history and to set a kind of dialogue between the different works of art, who shouldn't be seen they shouldn't just be considered in a very standard fashion. No, they wanted to reset that so we could look at the space and the role of art in social spaces so that we can encourage a dialogue between work and art through different works. What about women? How are women viewed through the artistic eye? Reset the image. So all of that to say, we didn't have to, have any kind of a militant statement here, but the way that they were hanging pictures changed what? Well, it changed the way that they contributed to the deconstruction and their subsequent reconstruction of museums, to the decolonization, which today reflects the sense behind two major projects. You have the Museum and the City Museum. These are two different projects within Nantes. So when you look at the projects for 2024, we find ourselves in front of major societal questions. We have to have spaces where we can breathe, in overt contradiction with a social movement where tension is high. So a lack of resource is not a lack of resource. Biodiversity, what is it? We have to re-examine where we're going.
And so this is kind of contradicting this neo-capitalistic approach. I'm kind of referring here to Yves Citon's work when I say this. The idea would be to say that, well, this kind of let's say, a pathological, let's say, over-solicitation of resources instead of just using your own resources is problematic, where you would have to pay attention to other things, to the humans, to the world, to ecology, for instance. And so it's this kind of ecology of attention that public authorities would have to consider, and museums play a very important role in this. And so there is, let's say, a very important link between a city project and a museum project. The possibility to connect and the possibility to disconnect. And so recognizing a museum as some kind of a nurturing garden in a way. And I say this because in some debates, regarding the cost of museums, well, if you consider a museum as a green space in the city, could make it easier, why not, to achieve, let's say, the goal of the cities would be to be able to have more museum and more such spaces in their urban areas. So, well, yeah, anyway. But so, yeah, this is all about breathing and breathing fraternity and breathing together in order to become more fraternal. Yeah, I think that's the way he coined it. Anyway, and so anyway, I won't dwell too much on this. I know that Philippe is going to be having this scientific approach to the whole matter. But anyway, La Cité des Imaginaires in Nantes is a very important project. So the museum and the Cité des Imaginaires. So the Cité des Imaginaires will be set in this neighborhood of Nantes, at the west of Nantes, and this is a very important area where we will have the Jules Verne Museum, which today is a small museum. Jules Verne, by the way, was born in Nantes, right? And he actually started his whole career as a writer in Nantes, on the Nantes docks. And thanks to an inheritance, the city has a very, very rich heritage with a lot of publications by Jules Verne and writings by Jules Verne. Anyway, I just want to make a link here with Jules Verne, if I may. In recent years, some people have been publishing, and sometimes quite interestingly, on Jules Verne's work. And the main question was, can we still read Jules Verne, right? Now, if you said Jules Verne in the historical context, which was his at the time, right? Well, what we see is that Jules Verne travels through geography, taking into account the colonial aspect and the environmental aspect. We see Jules Verne taking into account the risk of wealth, the risk of related to new areas, to new territories, the devastation by the capitalistic approach of humans, the threat to nature of this crave for richness and wealth by humans. And we believe that, in a way, Jules Verne was a whistleblower. Now, obviously, you have to set this in the 19th century. You have to set this in the context of industrialization, of technical progress, and already there, and already then, did people see the danger of these approaches? Now, obviously, this new approach to Jules Verne's work, taking into account this war of the imagination, if you take this into account with regards to the war of images, of different approaches to the imagination. We have, for instance, Philippe Cadet says in one of his publications, if we do not like our world, well, let's go visit other worlds. And I think that this is the spirit of this museum, La Cité des Imaginaires. We want to start from reality, right, in the Museum of Natural History, and move towards the imagination. And we want to kind of create this ability for people to write, to draw, and to create this imagination. So yeah, this is the project of the city, and this really changed our way of considering museums. Now, the Natural History Museum of Nantes has been working a lot on, let's say, strengthening its position in the city and organizing many different events. And based on this new ownership, let's say, of its area, of its space, let's say, the museum has embarked on a new trip and have become very important, I would say even key players, if you consider the life in the city, the life in the local area around Nantes, and certainly in other cities. Now, obviously, this is an open path. It's not an easy path. Heritage is a very complex world, if I may say, especially if you consider decolonizing this heritage. And so, yeah, obviously, we have to take into account any social tension as you come across these in any area, in every territory. So, yeah. But we can, if we do this, build bridges between communities that make the city. So yeah, this is in a nutshell what I wanted to say regarding the future of our work in the coming decade. Thank you.
Merci, Nicolas.
Well, thank you very much, Nicolas. Well, that was very interesting. So, well, we heard from the Director General, we heard from the elected representative how Nantes museums are evolving, and these are indeed the issues that we need to tackle today and tomorrow, and what we will be doing in the context of these conferences. So, thank you very much for being with us here today, both of you. Very interesting. Now, I'm going to give the floor to Nicolas Cardou, who is the director of the Nature Museum in Valais. Oh, no, it's Anita. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah? No?
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
My name is Anita HERMANNSTAEDTER from the Natural History Museum in Berlin, and it's now my pleasure to introduce Nicolas KRAMAR to you, to all of you. Nicolas is a hybrid colleague in our natural history world, and since 2013 he has been the director of the Musée de la Nature de Valais in Switzerland. And his professional path has been characterized by a double culture, this is why I said hybrid, in natural sciences with a master degree in earth sciences and a PhD in geochemistry, and in the humanities with a research master degree in history, philosophy, and the didactics of sciences. And for more than 15 years, Nicolas has participated in numerous scientific mediation activities, and he has taken part as a scholar to researchers in sciences of education. Nicolas is a ICOM-Nathist board member. He is chair of the ICOM-Nathist Anthropocene working group and a member of the Committee for Museum Definition, Prospects, Potentials, and Potential, that proposed the museum definition voted in Prague 2 years ago. At the Nature Museum, he has developed various projects related to the topic of the Anthropocene, and the largest of these projects, the Objectif Terre exhibition, has been awarded the 2016 Expo Prize of the Swiss Academy of Sciences and was the world's first exhibition on this theme produced by a natural history museum. And since then, he has been involved in international collaborations in museology on the topic of the Anthropocene in natural history museums. So, having said that, and looking on your comprehensive education expertise in this field, we are now looking forward to your keynote speech that is dedicated to the topic Museums Collections Challenged by the Anthropocene. Thank you, Nicolas.
I take this microphone, okay? Okay. So thank you very much for this presentation, and of course thank you very much for this invitation. Of course, it's a great honor to talk about this so important topic as it was presented before, and of course it's very interesting to go on with this topic, especially because of the many very interesting words that have been said by previous speaker who talked a few minutes ago here. So I will switch in French because my English is not so good, and maybe instead of speaking bad globish English, maybe it's better if I switch in French, because I do know that you have a very good English translation. I don't know if it's okay for you. Has everybody headset and things to follow this presentation? Is it okay for you, or do you need something? Okay, so I will go on in French it's much better in terms of quality, and I will try to make only 25 minutes in order to have a few questions after that. So, bien sûr, il a été dit que
right, so indeed, it has been said that obviously the social and natural or environmental impact is really important. So I will be tackling these issues, but I will try and answer, let's say, the questions that you threw at me in a way, Madame. And indeed, these are very important issues that we need to consider as a natural history museum. So as a cultural institution, and by the way, I will finish my presentation on this. I obviously will be referring to the definition of a museum. So we are a cultural institution. Culture is not only art, it's also natural science at the service of society. And so we need to be as efficient as possible and to perform as much as possible in order to tackle these environmental issues. Right. So having said this, and as we are in France, I will be mentioning a very important philosopher, Bruno Latour, who during COVID, especially during COVID, was constantly reminding us that the challenges of our time were the environmental related challenges, not so much the political, but the environmental challenges, and the political were actually related to them. Right? So it didn't mean that we shouldn't deal with the other challenges, but these were as, according to him, the most important. And so if we take this into account, well, I think we can question our practices as cultural institutions. So I'm talking about museums as a whole right here. Now, unfortunately, this is a bit of a caricature here, but many museums, if we say, okay, perhaps put apart eco-museum and a certain very specific museums who deal with, let's say, cars or chocolate, let's say, many museums are linked to a certain number of areas in academia. And each area in academia has its own way to produce knowledge and its approach to interpreting the collections that are exposed. And so it's true that exhibitions are organized based on this. And so with this in mind, I think what we can say is that natural history museums, for a long time, this is really not new, have been dealing with climate change, have been dealing with biodiversity, with food, invasive species, and so on. So we haven't been waiting for the 21st century to deal with this, if I may put it this way. And so this type of approach, in a way, I believe is important. Now, the question we could ask ourselves now is this enough? Does this suffice? Should we not take this, let's say, one step further? And this is, in a way, what I will be trying to do in my presentation and perhaps echo a certain number of things that you mentioned before me. Right, so indeed, when dealing with the environment and environmental-related issues, well, you deal with climate change, with the loss of biodiversity, with global changes, environmental crisis, and the Anthropocene. Now, I can't, let's say, dwell too much on all of these issues, but I believe that global changes is a good one because it actually deals with many at the same time. So climate change, biodiversity, and many others, because it's true that the geopolitical realm actually deals with these issues. So the environmental crisis is a problem, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to communication, because crisis leads you to believe that you could come to, let's say, a time preceding the crisis. But the thing is that our impact on the environment is so big that we cannot go back in time. So crisis, if you're too techno-solution-oriented, could lead you to believe that you could come back to a time before the crisis, which I believe is not possible. So I also like the issue of the Anthropocene, even though it has its limits, but I believe it also is quite broad, right? And it's a very interesting concept because it allows you to, let's say, pick from many different areas of knowledge that are not really new. And it allows you to deal with these very ancient, let's say, concepts and ideas, and new at the same time. Now, Anthropocene is basically a geological issue, right? And so the idea is to say that, okay, well, there is a new area following the Holocene and so on. So, well, in March of this year, the stratigraphic committee decided that this was not possible. I'm also a geologist, and I'm not really happy about this this publication. But anyway, yeah. So let me remind you that officially we are still in the Holocene, and the Holocene has been defined in the let's say that okay, we are still in a let's say hidden in the ice in Greenland. Anyway, but the thing is that in ice there is a flow, and I believe that the ice. The golden spike, let's say, of Holocene will melt at some point. So, well, and I say this because if you have this symmetrical approach, this is something that was, let's say, mentioned in these, let's say, several times in these war of scientists. Now, the thing is that I think the idea of this publication was that, okay, well, we wanted to design a cause, Homo sapiens, in this case, right? But the thing is that some people believe that there's not one humanity. So you have Homo sapiens, but not only. And we obviously have to deal with different, let's say, sub-groups. But anyway, Holocene corresponds to the Neolithical, right, area. And, I mean, I think there is no centric than the Anthropocene. Okay, so that was just my little dig, if I may. But anyway, but then again, so this is a very recent publication article published in Nature anyway, and so it makes obviously sense that the Anthropocene in many different cultural groups and academia groups, let's say, that this is, let's say, an important topic. Now, one thing that, let's say, will not be attacked by anyone is that the Anthropocene. Oh, I have to slow down for the interpreters. Where are the interpreters? Oh. Well, we can't see them anyway, but okay, apparently I have to slow down. I will slow down. I'm really sorry. I will slow down. I'm from Switzerland, so yeah, I just, I speak very fast. There you go for your cliches about the Swiss. Anyway, so I think one thing that no one will attack is that the global environmental changes that we are experiencing nowadays are significant in terms of the Earth history and due to a specific species, Homo sapiens, right? And I think this is something no one discusses, right? So, and I won't be discussing this here, right? But this is something no one will contradict me on, okay? And bearing this in mind, we need to consider Anthropocene as a signal, okay? A signal that tells us that something is really going wrong. And as such, let's say that the first consequence of Anthropocene, as far as I believe, is a shock of time or a crossing of times. Okay, so the historical time and the geological time. And if you consider this as let's say in the education approach, this leads to a certain number of misconceptions, time misconceptions, right? Obviously, our approach is usually a time-related approach, and so yeah, we consider these areas, let's say, very big chunks of times, and then we consider these as obstacles to the stable state of time, stable state of our world, and we need to question these and take these into account. Anyway, and so, well, we have these representations of time, especially in the Western world. We consider time as, let's say, progress. So it's a constant progress, and our world has been built on the substratum and then life that was just working on a very theoretical approach to say. But anyway, we need to consider this when we consider these topics. Now, if we now consider our historian colleagues, we see very interesting approaches. If we take 3 moments in time, okay, obviously I cannot go over the whole of natural history, but anyway, we start, let's say, with Leibniz, right, who considered the geological realm and the present time. And nature was seen as let's say, a back throw, right? And then we move to Fernand Braudel, beginning of the 20th century, and he considers different, let's say, temporal chunks, let's say, and that fit into each other like the Russian dolls, okay? And then if we move to Dipesh Chakrabarti, so this is in a way, a post-colonial approach. This is an Indian historian who was a teacher in Chicago, very prestigious university, sorry. And he considers the intertwining, right, of both. So that's quite interesting, right, if you consider these different approaches. And you see that this is very far away from our cosmology. Now, if we move, just quick bypass to say a few words about anthropology, Philippe Descola, but he's not the only one to believe this, right? He, let's say, since the end of Renaissance, I already actually showed this slide in 2016 in Milan, and which shows, let's say, this approach. It's just a model, right? So obviously it can be discussed, but it's quite interesting nonetheless, because it shows that in the Western realm, right, you have a new approach to nature called naturalism, and that the idea is that we share with nature a same materiality, right? and I'm not going to be very precise about this, but anyway, the idea is to say that humans are unique. And so we're very, let's say, we step away from nature in a way. And so the idea is to discuss this approach and relation to nature. And it's quite interesting here because it shows us what nature is and what culture is and how both are linked. Now, I don't have the time to go into too much detail about this, but it shows that nature is, let's say, seen or designed as a machine, and science that is actually only, let's say, at its very first steps in, say, considers that as machines follows a certain number of rules, well, nature follows more or less the same rules. And this is how we discover the rules and laws of nature. And this point of view is not opposed, if I may say, to the theological approach of the world. And many clerks and religious clerks, right, have this approach. And understanding the laws of nature is understanding how God created world. Because it's true, I say this because in the 17th century there was a lot of, let's say, battle between the scientific world and the church, right, the religious world. Now, if we come back to France, because we are in France, right, well, this approach leads us to humans being the possessors, the owners of this world. Right. Now, if we come back to our work in museums, well, basically what we could say is that, and I'm still following Bruno Latour, this French philosopher, is that, let's say, nature or culture could be questioned and should be questioned. And so I do nature X or culture X, or is an exclusive, right? It's the one or the other. And so the idea is to ask this question, okay, right, is a chicken an object of nature or of culture? Right? Because if we consider our cosmology, well, it's one or the other. And the thing is that we don't often ask ourselves this question because, okay, well, yeah, this is an animal, so this is natural history. But a chicken doesn't exist in nature. It's just a product of the natural selection. It's a creation of man, right? And so it is an animal production, but it has been modified in a way and created by man. And so we have these hybrids that question the way we understand the world and the way we position ourselves. So nature, culture, this opposition doesn't work because the chicken is not either natural or cultural, it's both. And we can have chickens, and we should have chickens in the natural history museums and in our museums because in a way they're chickens are an artifact, but you can have other examples. Let's say a geological example, and I'm very proud of having this. Trinitite. Trinitite is sand that you found in the Amorogoro, or was it? I can't remember the name. Amorogoro desert. Anyway, when you had the first nuclear test, Trinity, right? So this is the 16th of July, 1945. 5:29 a.m. and this is when Trinitite was created for the first time. Okay, boom. Is that natural? Is that cultural? Well, neither or both. And so I'm very happy to be able to present this because obviously, well, talking about Anthropocene, well, this is let's say somewhere halfway through the 20th century, and yeah. So, but then I can give you another example. I went to for a walk by the river next to my my museum, and you have, let's say, Alp rocks and other rocks, concrete rocks, and so you have stones that are seen as geological forms that follow the geological process. But then you have concrete, and this concrete only has, well, I mean, has only been around for, let's say, 10 years or a few decades, and some have been around for millions and hundreds of millions of years. But both are these stones, right? So we have a hybrid here too. So we have published booklets that present these concrete stones as artifacts, or what we call techno-fossils, right? And they're very interesting because not only do they have this hybrid character, if I may put it this way, but they also are geological markers, and they will be around for a long time because in the rivers all over the world, you have these types of stones, and not only concrete, other techno-fossils, which will sit in the sedimentary, let's say, layers, and will be around for millions or billions of years. And so the geological marker is interesting. They are fossils in a way. And in the room of our museum, we mixed up a certain number of these objects because we believe that they have the same status.
The same when it comes to stag's heads. You can see that's not classical. These are trophies when you see their antlers or they have some kind of plant growth in their antlers. These are stags that have died because they have been caught in some kind of thicket. And this, of course, then was an occasion for us to re-examine the publication and say, well, at different levels, what is our discourse? Do we present them as a symbol of territorial limits, land system use, how we're using the different land, how we're destroying certain natural environments, where when we build hedges and thickets, we are blocking biodiversity. And also from a more symbolic point of view, remember what I said about nature versus culture, because these stag or deer trophies are not classic trophies. And I can say, you know, philosophically, you have to say, is it natural or cultural? And often people will finish by saying, well, it's a work of art. But it's not a work of art if there's no intention behind it. So this is a classic hybrid object. If you want to know more, there's been a wonderful series of workshops organized by the Natural Science Museum in Berlin, and they dealt with this question, a great deal of very diverse contribution, and I would suggest you read this article, which really is a resume of all the challenges. You can see a multi-layer description from this. I needed to contextualize, he's just quoting, to challenge, open up, deconstruct historical knowledge, production and collection. So it's really talking about the way things are presented. And I would advise that you read this. And within that framework, in Le Valais, we organized an exhibit working with the Center for Post-Natural History from Pittsburgh, which is a small center which looks on biological objects which have been intentionally modified. And from that, we created an exhibition which presented all of these hybrid objects which are present in our everyday life. I come back to my chickens and my hens. I'd like to thank my colleagues from Berlin who lent us this collection. It's wonderful, this collection that we have of hens and chickens. So we dealt with this and we put this in different parts of the exhibition to show that we wanted to illustrate the environment and the reaction of people. So on the left, you have a large chicken or hen, and there we're representing productivism in the 20th century, late 20th century. But if we want to talk about crossbreeding and the production side of hens in various regions, well, we had to look elsewhere. You might have chickens involved in cockfights. There we were going to show different kinds of feathers, etc. There were many reasons. We looked at the origins of domestication, as you saw earlier. Birds, we have domestic pigeons who could do backflips. So you can domesticate animals for any kind of reason. We were looking at the domestication of chickens and hens. Now, thanks to the Anthropocene, we were able to deal with cultural natures and hybrid objects, but we could also deal with the idea that concepts are not born of nothing at all. Anthropocene, well, what is it? It's a paradigm, a very deep-rooted paradigm which changed over the 20th century. We're looking at the emergence and evolution of Earth system science. We've always tried to be a little limited in our approach, and we had to widen our approach in the 20th century. We had to look at, examine reality in a very systemic approach, and I would advise you to read this article here. Of course, we're talking about natural science, but it also talks about human and social science. Why? Well, I can give you an example. In France, you heard about Bruno Latour-Fernand, the British scientist, the actor network theory, which is a systemic approach. In France, we have a paraphilosopher, as he defines himself, Edgar Morin. And he built his career on the idea of complexity, these 7 complex lessons in education for the future. But this has known a great deal of success in the French-speaking world and in the natural science world. So I'm trying to show a real change of paradigm when you adopt a systemic approach. It's interesting to consider things like this, but in this article I spoke about, we have this kind of schema, which tries to synthesize the vision that we have compared to the vision we have now. And that means we have to look at the Earth system, our vision of the Earth, and what's remarkable here, you can see a geosphere, a biosphere, and an anthroposphere with different flows. And what's really interesting is the anthroposphere is not a black box. You can see cultural values included now. That's incredible. If you want to question the challenges, today's challenges, you have to consider the cultural values and beliefs in the human population. I'm trying to speed through this as quickly as possible so we can talk about the next subject, the teaching tools, the teaching objectives in the Anthropocene. Well, what are the pedagogical goals? It's fairly classic. This, of course, is a transmission of information, of disciplinary knowledge. Now, if you move forward this way, you're just going to stay on the left-hand side of the plan that I talked about earlier. We're going to talk about transmission in terms of biology, physiology, etc., and then you come to an end. However, that's not what we want to do. We want to have a more integrated vision. We want to aim at making sure people can have a detached vision from this collective cultural approach. So, I'm a geologist. When I look at geological mediation, I'm not going to just talk about one aspect of what I do or the other. What I want to do is bring into play the representation of time and the individual's relationship with time. Now, I like in German there are two words in German. There's Kultur in German, that's a representation of collective representation, but the objective is to challenge these collective representations so you get to a cultural approach, Bildung, which is a personal approach, a personal mode of action, using what? Well, by giving sense, by giving meaning to people during the transmission of knowledge. And then you have a kind of virtuous circle that grows. Now, working with another school in Valais, the University for Science Teachers, we mounted an exhibition, and the objective was to talk about environmental questions, but of course we wanted to challenge the notion of what we can control and what we can't control in this world. So in conclusion, I would say what? What is our stance as a professional museum, a natural history museum? Well, we have the classical vision. We need to prepare people, be present in the political dialogue of today. We want to be present in citizen science, of course. Yes, I can't really develop that, but there's some very interesting aspects in this remit as well. And that's why today I'd like to advocate for the following. We must be capable of challenging the values, questioning values to prepare the next generation, the societies of the future. The challenge is cultural as well. We have to be cultural players, not just working in the biological or physiological or geological sectors. We have to be cultural. We have to question, challenge the values, because often there is a gap between the cultural and the scientific approach. And my last slide is the definition of a museum. I was very privileged to be part of an international commission, so I participated in this new definition of museum. So I'm really proud of this slide, and here you have it. Because we have to talk about a tangible and an intangible heritage. I had to fight so we didn't put natural and unnatural cultural heritage. So I can tell you, I almost lost out, but we were able to put tangible and intangible, because in order to respond to the earlier question, every object in a museum is a cultural object by definition. If you have a list of objects, well, you have a scientific model, you have a cultural model, etc. But beyond the basic principle, we separate different objects. That's what we tend to do, but we can see that these objects are many hybrid objects, so we have to perhaps stop doing what we did before. Use our culture, yes, but do it with sufficient stance and hindsight, and actually take a stand back and see how we're actually going to identify objects in our museums. We have to look at the different educational offers. This could be done through very friendly, happy, fun actions. How are we sharing experience? But I also think, look at this word, reflection. What do we mean? We have to think about not only just truths that we've known for a while, but we have to challenge them. We have to challenge. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Nicolas, for this inspiring talk and start for the conference, and also for the strong recommendation and invitation to cross boundaries that that divided that what we call nature and culture. I think there lies the future of our field of the museums of history, and I'm very much looking forward to crossing boundaries with all of you. So as we are a little bit over the schedule, so I would give we won't have time for questions now, but we will integrate it into the question time after session 1. And please take the chance to talk to Nicolas, those who are here also during the break and during the lunch break. And now I would pass the microphone to Philippe to explain us how many minutes do we have for the break. 10 minutes. Okay, 10 minutes break, then we see us again.